Hi, I'm Dr. Pam Garcy. I'm a psychologist in Dallas, and I'm most honored to introduce to you tonight Dr. David Burns. And Dr. Burns is a renowned psychiatrist, award-winning researcher, and he's author of the phenomenally successful Feeling Good and Feeling Good Handbook, which have sold more than 5 million copies worldwide. And 50,000 American and Canadian mental health professionals have attended his training programs, and his weekly Feeling Good podcast with Dr. Rhonda Bavorsky have been downloaded more than 4 million times. Dr. Burns was a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy and is the founder and creator of Team CBT, which makes ultra rapid recovery from depression and anxiety possible. His latest book, Feeling Great, which you will see slightly behind him, the revolutionary new treatment for depression. We want them to know what it looks like. Describes the new tools in Team CBT and is intended for therapists and the general public alike. Dr. Burns is currently adjunct clinical professor emeritus of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Stanford Medical School, and he has served as visiting scholar at Harvard Medical School. He has received numerous awards for his research and teaching and offers a free weekly training group for Bay Area therapists at Stanford. His website, feelinggood.com, has a multitude of free resources for therapists and individuals struggling with depression and anxiety. And on a personal note, I discovered Dr. Burns when I was in graduate school in my internship, and I diligently worked through his book and his handbook and workbooks, and they gave me a lot of relief and helped me become a better therapist, I believe. So
that's good to hear. And I might add that we now have a free training group at Stanford, but it's now virtual, on Wednesdays for therapists from around the world.
wow,
So people from anywhere can, come and get therapist unlimited free training. The only payment is you have to come consistently. They're not drop-in groups, and we train in the new CBT, the new team techniques. We do personal work with the therapists who attend, and the Tuesday group is for therapists from California, and that's been going on for about 20 years now. And then the Wednesday group just started up about maybe 4 or 5 months ago.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Maybe I would take advantage of that, but if you let me in after this interview.
Oh, sure. Yeah. The Rhonda Borofsky is heading up the Wednesday group, and she's got some dynamite co-teachers with her, and the group starts out just like the Tuesday group with an hour teaching a technique and demonstrating it, and then break into small groups with small group leaders and practice it and get feedback. So we have a lot of fun with it.
That sounds wonderful. Well, I had a whole bunch of questions to ask you. I'm just so curious and so thankful for your
I appreciate
generosity.
your giving me this interview. I'm really honored and excited to shoot the breeze.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you. Well, one thing I've been wanting to ask you is what it's like knowing that you've had such an enormous impact on the lives of so many in authoring Feeling Good and all of your subsequent amazing books, and how we can help ourselves through shifting our thinking and behavior. What is that? What is that like for you?
Well, when I wrote Feeling Good, I mean, I really had a passion for it because I was very excited. Cognitive therapy was new, and I'd been in this psychopharmacology deal at University of Pennsylvania, and I was doing research on this chemical imbalance theory, and I knew that was hokum. I was supposed to. I had a tenure track position, and I had funding to develop a brain serotonin research laboratory at Penn. But I knew our research showed clearly that the chemical imbalance theory was a false theory, and I didn't want to spend my life studying something that wasn't the truth. And
Wow.
then
Yeah.
I was given out tons of antidepressants, and my patients were not recovering. Some got a little better, most didn't even get a little better. occasional patient got a lot better, but they were rare, and I knew that the whole promotion of antidepressants was not sound, and since then research has kind of proven that. So I was
Hmm.
just excited to write Feeling Good, and my idea was that there's a lot of teaching involved in learning cognitive therapy. So I thought, well, if I had a book, maybe I could get 100 copies of it made and then hand it out to my patients so they could read chapters between sessions, and then
Yeah.
I wouldn't have to explain everything at every session. And but then it got published, and it was so hard to find a publisher. Uh, and then about 2 or 3 months after it was published, I got a call from a medical student in Washington, D.C. And he said he was reading the book. It was really helping him, and he had a couple of questions. I couldn't believe it. It was my first fan, and I talked to him for about 3 hours because I thought this might be the last one.
Little
I
did you
better
know.
really enjoy it. But
Hmm.
one thing led to the next, and now I get letters and emails every day, many every day, of people who say your book, this book, or the other book, or the podcast have really changed my life, and God
Hmm.
bless you, Dr. Burns. And it's always so rewarding to hear that. And sometimes it'll be from someone who's very poor, living in Africa, or something like that, or someone without many
Wow.
resources. And that's what I enjoy the most, is
Hmm.
connecting with people. And I haven't charged anyone for a psychotherapy session for 25 or 30 years. And I'm not officially in private practice, really, but I treat people all the time. And I just love to hook in with somebody who's, trying to use the techniques and they're a little bit stuck. And then I'll maybe have a Zoom call with them or exchange emails with them and see them turn things around. And it's really rewarding. I love doing psychotherapy pretty much more than anything in the world, to be honest with you. Maybe the only thing that beats it for me is structural equation modeling, is mathematical modeling of various data sets that I'm collecting and have. But seeing somebody recover, especially when they recover right in front of your eyes in a single session, like a 2-hour session, it's just mind blowing. Uh,
Wow.
to me, it happened last night in the
Hmm.
training group.
Hmm.
Uh, there was a fellow in the small group. We were demonstrating this technique in the large group, and then we broke into small groups. We have about maybe 15 small group leaders. And there was a fellow in my small group who was talking about how insecure he felt whenever he would email the group, thinking, what if I say something stupid and people will look down on me? And I guess this has just been eating away at him probably for all his life. And so we just did externalization of voices and feared fantasy. And he just turned his anxiety into joy and laughter. And he just blew it out of the water. And then I said,
Wow.
now for homework, I want you to send an email to the entire group and tell them how anxious you've been and how you've been hiding out, and like that, and see how
Yeah.
they respond. He did that. And then he got flooded with all these, love-filled emails, and, oh, I feel the same. I'm so glad you sent that email. I get insecure too. And I just love it to see people escape from that prison, I'm not good enough,
Hmm.
and suddenly feel their oats, so to speak, as a human being, and feel the joy, and just for me, like the joy of a little kitty here, and petting her, and making friends with her.
Hmm.
That gives me a lot of joy too.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wow. I wasn't aware you're living such an amazing life of service. It's really inspiring. I'm just curious about how your thinking as a psychiatrist and as a therapist has evolved since authoring Feeling Good, and
Yeah, sure.
any major paradigm shifts
Yeah.
that you've gone through.
Well, some things have remained the same when I wrote Feeling Good, and have even, sharpened the focus on certain basic ideas. And then in other areas, there's been, radical evolution of my thinking, and now embracing things I thought were BS 40 or 50 years ago. And one of the things that's remained the same, the first cognitive therapy technique I developed is called externalization of voices, where you become the patient's negative voice with permission and attack them with their own thoughts. And then you do role reversals until the patient hits it out of the park. And that technique can often catapult someone not only into full recovery, but what the mystics would call enlightenment. It's more than full recovery. It's getting a sudden sense of joy and a much radical different understanding of yourself and the world. And that I used it all the time from the day I created it. I teach it all the time. I still use it all the time. It's fantastic. The theory has evolved, and I now believe, and I have significant evidence to support this, that it's impossible to reduce anyone's negative feeling without reducing their belief in the distorted thought that triggers that feeling. And that this is true in all schools of psychiatry and psychology, even if the people don't believe in cognitive therapy. If they're getting an improvement in someone's feelings, it must be the case that they have directly or indirectly changed that person's negative thinking pattern, that they're not believing it as much. This Bob Niemeyer, I don't know if you've heard of him, he's a grief expert and a really good guy. And I met him years ago, and we did a study together, and then I lost track of him, but I always remembered how wonderful he was, and then I stumbled across him again. And so he came to the Tuesday group at Stanford virtually, and he demonstrated his grief therapy with one of my patients live, one of my students who had lost her father, died, and her husband left her. And so she was feeling pretty terrible. And his way of working with her was radically different from mine. He had her visualize her emotions and what color is it and what's the texture of it, kind of Gestalt type stuff. And it's all, emotion focused. And sure enough, she had a really nice response. And because we measure moods at the start and end of every session, and I had measured her depression at the start and at the end, and went almost down to zero. It was quite dramatic, and it only took him maybe 20 or 30 minutes to do this. But then I knew what some of her negative thoughts were. See, he didn't ask her about her negative thoughts. He probably thinks they're rubbish, as so many people do. And I reminded her of what her negative thoughts had been, and then say, "Did you have any change in your belief in those thoughts during the demo?" And she said, "Oh, absolutely." So even there, someone who's probably an anti-cognitive therapist can only get results with cognitive therapy. And that's true of all therapies in the world.
That's wonderful to hear.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah, especially if you love this kind of therapy,
Yeah. But well, it's true if you love a science of psychotherapy. We're developing a scientific, data-driven, science-based, research-based approach, which is what TEAM is. And the other corollary of it that's sharpened the focus is that anything that causes someone to stop believing a negative thought or to dramatically reduce their belief, that will 100% certainty reduce the feelings that thought triggers. So it's really taken the theory of cognitive therapy and saying this is the way all human change, emotional change occurs. There is no other way.
I'm so excited. That's
isn't
awesome.
that cool?
Yeah, it is. It's well, I think about things like I studied a bit with Ellis and Beck, not as much as you, of course, but I remember.
You studied with Ellis, right?
Yes.
A little.
Yes.
I loved Ellis. I didn't know him very well, but I admired him so much. So he loved me because he knew how much I praised him all the time. So but he was a character, but boy, his contributions were fantastic. And the thing I loved about him that I didn't find any of the other gurus had this quality. He had integrity, and he didn't steal from other people and call it his own.
Yeah.
And boy, did I respect that about him.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's true. That's very true. Um, oh yeah, just one of the things that he would say is it's the beliefs that you believe that have the power over you, you know?
Say that again.
It's the beliefs that you believe that have the power over you, right? Like if you don't believe the belief, it doesn't have any power over you.
Yeah,
But
that's
right?
right. If you have a negative to be get upset, you have to have a negative thought and you have to believe it.
Yeah, and you just said the research is supporting that it's the believability in the believability in the belief. Is that how you said it?
Well, the belief we ask how much do you believe this thought? I'm a
Right.
worthless human being between 0 and 100, and they might say, oh, 90% or 100% or 80%. And then I work with them, and then I say, now how much do you believe it? And the idea is to get it down to zero. If you get it all the way to zero, then they really will go into enlightenment. I mean, that it's like an explosive result. But if they even get it, say, from an 80 to a 10 or to a 15, there will be a dramatic reduction in depression.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And do you feel that or do you think that they need repetition of that? Or,
Repetition has no value.
Mhm.
What has, maybe you could give yourself a stupid positive affirmation,
No,
and you could say it
I
a
mean,
thousand times and it wouldn't do any good.
no, I mean, do you think that
Practice.
yeah, I guess that's a better word is
Yeah,
practice. Yeah.
practice and working at it and writing down your negative thoughts and practice identifying the distortions and crushing those thoughts with a variety of techniques. And
Hmm.
that I did research at my clinic when I was in Philadelphia on 400 or 500 patients, and we looked how much homework did they do during the first 12 weeks of therapy. And I published this in JCCP, which is a fine
Yeah.
research journal, and I replicated it again in the same journal. But we found that virtually every patient who did at least some consistent psychotherapy homework practice, as you say, between sessions, improved dramatically or recovered within the first 12 weeks. And every patient, 100% of the patients who refused to do any psychotherapy homework, uh, none of them improved even slightly.
Hmm.
Most of them deteriorated, and most eventually just dropped out of therapy. And that
Yeah.
showed to me the massive causal effect of
Hmm.
motivation and resistance on recovery from depression. And that discovery was what actually ushered in team CBT,
Oh,
which was the
okay.
big difference in my thinking.
So it was when you discovered that motivation was really key.
Yeah,
Hmm.
right. And if you look at the outcome literature on the treatment of depression with all known forms of psychotherapy, they all suck. There's no form of psychotherapy that's ever been shown to have an impressive effect on reducing depression. Cognitive therapy will do maybe, well, they're all like around 50%. Uh, will a 50% improvement in depression, but none of them are like at 80% or you
Hmm.
know, or whatever. And
Hmm.
the reason that they all fall short
Hmm.
is because they're all trying to help people. And this causes patients to resist. And that none of them, or almost none of them, uh, address the patient's resistance. And so the ones who aren't recovering, you can have all the techniques in the world from all the
Hmm.
different schools of therapy in the world, and they can be very clever techniques. But if the patient has resistance, they're going to be yes butting the therapist, and they're the ones who aren't going to get better. And that was, of course, I saw that, and I'm sure you've seen that in your clinical work as well. And so that's what led to Team CBT. And it was a big change in my thinking to realize, my gosh, resistance is for real. Freud was right. Resistance does exist and has a massive causal effect on recovery. What he
Hmm.
didn't get right is he didn't understand what resistance was. His ideas about it never went anywhere, and his technique to treat it never went anywhere.
Hmm.
But resistance is a real phenomenon. Now, someone like Ellis would just argue with the patient until the patient recovers or gets mad and drops out of therapy. But we've kind of developed new resistance busting or resistance melting would be a better way to put it, techniques. And I now do that at the start of every therapy session. All my students do as well. And and I see patients in a 2-hour session only.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell them, this is the only session you're ever going to have with me. Although if you ever need tune-ups, I'll give you unlimited free tune-ups for the rest of your life. But we're going to complete the therapy in this session. And
Wow.
then
Yeah.
I after empathizing, I bring their resistance to conscious awareness and then melt it away with the new techniques that are really fun, but kind of hard for therapists to learn them. And then once you've melted away the resistance, just any techniques you use work really, really quickly. I'd be using identify the distortions, double standard technique, externalization of voices, a few core techniques, but then
Mm-hmm.
the patient typically will knock it out of the park. And then we do
Wow.
relapse prevention training, which takes about 20 minutes, and then we're done.
How do you define resistance?
Well, let's see. I can tell you what it is. There's two forms of resistance that I call outcome resistance and process resistance. And outcome resistance, in very simple terms, means the patient may be coming for the treatment of anxiety or depression or a troubled marriage or whatever. And a good outcome would mean if they're depressed, they go into euphoria in today's session. If they're anxious,
Yeah.
their anxiety 100% disappears in today's session. If they have a relationship problem, they see how to develop a loving relationship with that person they're so pissed off at. And
Mm.
outcome resistance means they'll stubbornly resist that outcome. Now, if you say, here's a magic button, if you press this magic button, you'll be cured instantly with no effort. Will you press the magic button? And every patient says, "Oh yeah, I'll press it in a heartbeat." And then I say, "Well, before we do that, I don't have a magic button, but I've got some incredible techniques, and it's very possible, even likely, all your symptoms will disappear in today's session. But I don't think it's a good idea to use those techniques." And they say, "Well, why not? Why not? I've been in therapy for 50 years. Nothing has helped me.
Oh my
If you've
God.
got some techniques, give
Yeah.
them to me." And then I say, "Well, let's look at what your negative thoughts and feelings show about you that's positive and awesome. You and your core values first. You've done this daily mode log. You have 90% elevations in 8 different categories of negative feelings. You've got these 12 self-critical thoughts. I'm a loser. I'm worthless. And you believe these thoughts 90, 100%. Before we try to change any of this, here you're like 100% ashamed. You press that magic button, your shame is going to disappear. What does your shame show about you and your core values that's positive and awesome? What does your guilt show about you that's positive and awesome? And what are some benefits to you in feeling ashamed or feeling guilty?" And then they say, "Oh, I can't think of anything." Uh, and then I'll say, "Well, how about this? And how about this?" And then they get it. And we start making this list, and we come up with a list of maybe 20 or more overwhelming, amazing things that their negative feelings show about them. And,
Oh,
and, and
that's
then I say,
brilliant.
"Well, my
Yeah.
gosh, if you press that magic button, all this good stuff's going to go down the toilet, right?
Mm-hmm.
With your negative feelings. Why would you want to do that?" And then they say, "Oh, that's terrible. No, I didn't realize all this stuff about myself."
Huh.
And then we come in with a magic dial and say, "Well, maybe instead of like a woman, her daughter had been shot in the face 9 years earlier, and she'd been in a state of severe depression the whole nine years. And her daughter lived, but had multiple surgeries for multiple years, and had a lot of psychotherapy for PTSD. And 9 years later, her daughter was still severely depressed and anxious. And the mother was feeling guilty because her daughter said, "Can I go out and play, mommy?" When she was 12, and she had been going out to play after dinner every night for years. So she said, "Yeah, yeah, okay." And then the daughter went out, and these boys snuck up on her with a high-powered pellet rifle, the type you might use to, shoot a squirrel or something like that and kill it. And they snuck up on her, and right a foot in front of her face, they aimed it right at her face and pulled the trigger, and this bullet hit her tooth, and the tooth exploded, and there was blood everywhere.
Wow.
And then she'd been telling herself, I'm a failure as a mother. This was my fault. I never should have let her go out to play and stuff like that.
Mm.
And so
God.
these thoughts and feelings are they show what a beautiful mother she is.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Yes.
And her anxiety, and you press this button, you'll be happy right now. So that you want to be happy about the fact that your daughter is still suffering. Is that right? Oh no, you're right. I don't want to be happy. My sadness shows my love for my daughter. And then the theme that evolves is that your symptoms are not the expression, as mental health professionals have been claiming, and the American Psychiatric Association. These are not brain disorders that are the result of what's wrong with you, like a chemical imbalance in the brain, that fraudulent theory that some people still keep promoting, that there's never been any evidence for it, never will be. But your symptoms are the result of what's right with you and what's most beautiful about you.
Wow.
And the moment the patient sees
Hmm.
that, it blows their mind, and their shame suddenly disappears. And the paradox is, you see, I'm trying to sell them on all the great things about their negative feelings and
Yeah.
thoughts, and I'm not trying to change them. And so then someone's got to do the chasing. And so then
Now
they
it's
have
time.
to do the chasing, and so the therapy
It's a
is now.
win-win.
Yeah, that's right. And it's entirely paradoxical, and it's so much
Hmm.
fun because once the resistance disappears, this wise voice that's as wise as Beck ever was or Ellis ever was, everyone
Hmm.
seems to have it inside them. But because of their high standards, they're suppressing that. They're thinking, I'm duty bound to suffer because I've failed, and all of this kind of stuff, and my anxiety is protecting me and protecting my family, and yes, it's uncomfortable, but I don't really want it to disappear. And once you address that, it just opens up the door for rapid recovery. So that's been the biggest change. But another big change is that Beck had his depression inventory, which is not a great test. It was the first, though, so it was a revolution historically.
Hmm.
But I use very brief, accurate tests. How are you feeling now? Not over the past 2 weeks. You ask me, David, how have you been feeling over the last 2 weeks? I say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been on a roller coaster. I'm always on a roller coaster. You want to hear when I was at my best, when I was at my worst? You see, but people know, how are you feeling right now? And so we measure their feelings just before the start of the session. We measure depression, anxiety, suicidal urges, anger, happiness, relationship satisfaction. Uh, and it doesn't take them long to do it. And then at the end of the session, they go into the waiting room or do it at home in this teletherapy era, and they take those tests again. And then I, the therapist, can see immediately how effective or ineffective I was. And this is a huge revolution, because when I was a resident, we never measured anything. And we didn't even have techniques except patient talks, and I listen and give out these pills. And it
Wow.
was so unpleasant.
Yeah.
And I would ask my supervisors, who were usually psychoanalysts, when does the recovery happen? And are we going to measure anything? And
Hmm.
they would never answer those questions. But,
Wow.
but now we have, for the first time, that therapists, if they're courageous, can see exactly how you did. It's like having a X-ray machine for the first time, an emotional X-ray machine. And I did a study in the Stanford inpatient unit, because most therapists think, I don't need to measure. Patients won't be honest, and I know anyway. And
Hmm.
I did a study of the accuracy of therapists and knowing how patients felt after a 2 to 3 hour interview with the patient only on their emotions. Now, at the end of this interview, how depressed do you think the patient is? How anxious? How angry? How suicidal? Uh, and
Wow.
also, uh, uh, the patient takes the same test at the same time, but they have their backs to each other. So the expert is just trying to figure out how the patient feels at this moment. I just spent 3 hours with this patient.
Yeah.
And then the patient rates them for empathy, and they rate themselves for empathy using the exact same scale.
Mm.
And the accuracy of depression was 3%.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
That's
and the accuracy
terrible.
of suicidal urges was 0. The accuracy of anger was 0. The only thing that was even minimally accurate was empathy, and that was 9%, which is almost a completely inaccurate. But
Terrible.
therapists don't know this. So if a therapist tells you that they're getting great results and they're not measuring, they're just, as Albert Ellis so often said, I wouldn't say this, but
Oh
he might have
gosh.
said they're full of shit.
Oh, that was.
Don't know what they're talking about. Or he would have used the F word. And so it's making therapists accountable for the first time. And a lot of therapists love it, and many are terrified of it, and some are enraged about the idea that they think that this is a horrible thing to do. But
I wonder
it's
what
a game
belief
changer.
system makes somebody get enraged about something that could help their patient.
Yeah, right, right. But
Um,
it's painful. I've had sessions when I was running the groups in the Stanford inpatient unit, and I'd measure their everything at the start and end of each group. So I'd see how effective was today's group, and how empathic what was I. And I've had times when I just thought I had worked with someone in the group, and I just thought, boy, I was just like a giant today. This is one of the historically greatest sessions ever. And then I look at the patient scores at the end, and I just
humbling.
screwed up totally. And they're giving me a 0 on empathy. They're giving me grades lower than what Hitler could have gotten. And so I have to grab that patient and sit down and say, my gosh, what happened? And I
Do
thought
you
we
ever
had
have
such.
the converse experience where you thought you did a terrible job?
Yeah, yeah, I've had that. I had a patient the
Yeah.
very next week who came in from the intensive care unit, and at the beginning of the group, she said, I have borderline personality disorder, and I'm an intravenous amphetamine addict, and I've had multiple hospitalizations, and I'm disappointed that I failed in my suicide attempt, but I'm going to do it right tonight or as soon as possible. And I said, well, have you ever had something called cognitive therapy? Maybe we could work with you because you have the thought that you're this worthless human being, and that things are hopeless for you. And she started swearing at me, and giving me the finger and shut the F up. And I've heard about this stupid cognitive therapy garbage, and I don't want any of it. And I really felt like I was 2 inches tall, like I had been shrunk. The shrink got shrunk.
Yeah.
And it was disturbing, really. She was so outraged. And I mean, we all have a tendency when people are so mad at us, say, I must have done something wrong. So I ignored her and worked with the woman on we were around a big round table on the opposite side.
Mhm.
And she also felt like she was worthless and deserved to die, but she was open to using the cognitive techniques, and she had a
Yay,
dramatic,
vicarious learning.
yeah, that's right. And she had a tremendous change. And then I had to look at the end of session ratings,
Yeah.
which I had to force myself to look at that angry woman's, because I could just feel her sending hatred to me throughout the whole group. I could feel it, hot fumes of hatred coming.
Wow.
And I looked at it, and all of her scores went to 0 on all the mood tests. And then the empathy was a perfect score. The helpfulness was a perfect
Wow.
score. And then at the bottom, they write, what did you like the least? And she just put about today's group. She said nothing. And then what did you like the
Oh.
best? And she says, Dr. Burns, when you were talking to that other woman, I thought you were talking to me. And I'd never heard of a cognitive distortion before. And I thought the problem was that I really am a bad, worthless human being.
Oh.
And now I see that those thoughts were distorted,
Yeah.
and my depression has just disappeared for the first time in my life. And God bless you, Dr. Burns. And again, if I hadn't measured, I would have avoided her on the unit. I would, oh, this woman hates me. you can't tell how you're coming across much of the time. And so the measurement tools is another huge evolution in my thinking. I always measured because I was a researcher before I went into clinical private practice. So I used to use the Beck Depression Inventory when I went into private practice. But my whole understanding of, you can measure empathy, you can measure helpfulness, you can measure the patient's honesty. They'll tell you if they're being honest with you. It's all you have to do is ask them with a nicely worded question, and they'll tell you exactly what's going on. But yeah, that's been huge too. And then finally, on the method side, originally I was kind of all cognitive, but now I use about more than 100 methods to smash distorted thoughts, and a lot of them are cognitive, but they're drawn from at least a dozen schools of therapy. And I'm agnostic with regard to schools of therapy. I think all schools of therapy should be flushed down the toilet, and all the gurus should have their licenses taken away. That's my thinking. But that we should go into a science of human behavior, a science of psychotherapy, and stop having these competing religions called schools of therapy, and use techniques that are individualized to the patient. I use some psychodynamic techniques like the hidden emotion. I use behavioral techniques like exposure therapy. I use humor-based techniques. I use paradoxical techniques, interpersonal techniques. The thing for me, that the technique has to be specific. I'm dead against non-specific techniques. I would never prescribe meditation, for example. It's non-specific. I only use specific techniques that will target the patient's exact negative thought and have a high chance of blasting that thought out of the water. But that's the main changes. But I'm just lucky to have my Tuesday group at Stanford, because I've got, people like you who are brilliant, and a lot of them, if they're a clinical psychologist, I know, man, this is going to be a great person to work with, because as they say, the Buddha said this 2,500 years ago, the smart ones get PhDs and the rest go to medical school. So,
Yeah, right.
so whenever I have a clinical psychologist in our Tuesday group, it's just such a joy, because I'm going to have this super brilliant person who's a critical thinker help continue to evolve the model. And the model evolves every week, really.
Wow. That is, I have so many more questions.
We could do the 30-second answer to a bunch of
Okay,
questions.
we'll do the 30-second answer to the rest so that I can respect your time. But wow, what a joy this interview has been so
Yes, I
far.
love doing this. I'm so grateful.
Oh man, me too. Thank you very much. It's a thrill for me. Okay, so wow, what is a baby step that I can take as a therapist to help me to awaken to what you're talking about?
Well, you could, if you want to spend a little money, you could buy Feeling Great, because that's for therapists and the general public, and shows all the new team stuff. And it also has a tremendous amount of the cognitive therapy from Feeling Good. That's one thing you can do. If you're really interested too, you can get my psychotherapy ebook, which is how to do it for therapists, how to do team therapy. My website has tons of resources, practically all free, for therapists and the general public. So the Feeling Good podcast, we've done almost 250 of them now, and they're building all the time. And therapists, it started out to teach therapists how to do team therapy, but then I start speaking to both audiences, really. And you can go get unlimited free training. Go to our Wednesday training group for therapists all over the world. Move fast though, because Rhonda keeps a maximum of 50 people, and she has a waiting list. So when people drop out, they can be added in. So you can get into it. There's also the Feeling Good Institute in Mountain View, California. They have a certification program. I'm not affiliated with it, but I support them 200% because they're all my students. And you get a certification in team therapy, but it does take a lot of work. It's not something where you can go to a workshop and then start doing it. It's the
Hmm.
most difficult form of psychotherapy I think ever developed. And when I do it, I make it look real easy. And for me, it is real easy. But that's because I've been doing it for, 40 years or more. But it's very hard because the techniques are not intuitive. They go against the grain.
Hmm.
And most of what therapists have been trained to do, a lot of it is just very poor. That it's not good to do. The therapists want to rescue, they want to help, they want to do reassurance when they should be empathizing. And they throw techniques at patients without finding out what the patient's negative thoughts are, without even bringing the resistance to conscious awareness. And so you have to do a lot of things differently. Like uh, if a patient criticizes you on the empathy scale, and most therapists who use my empathy scale for the first time, I mean, use my scales, start using my scales. You can find them on my website and my shop.
Yeah.
And but it'll be disturbing to you because you'll
Hmm.
be shocked to find that almost all of your patients will fail you on empathy at almost every session.
Yeah, I
And
want to
and
get
and
that.
yeah, and then you've got to learn how to process that with them so it will deepen
Hmm.
the therapeutic relationship. And
Hmm.
that means agreeing with the patient's criticism and seeing that the patient's criticism really is true. Well, this involves the death of the therapist's ego. That's what the Buddha talked about.
Which is very healthy.
Yeah, 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 but it's frightening, and if you have a
Yeah.
little narcissism like I do, you're getting beaten up all the time by your patients because they'll nail you for every single error. But if you're humble and open to it, it's just a fantastic thing. That
Well,
wasn't
that's
30
super.
seconds. Let's try another question, see if we can make 30 seconds.
All right. Let's see. I'm curious about, we have as widespread as your system is becoming, and I believe it will get wider, more
Yeah,
widespread because it's helpful and it's good and it's in service. Um, so what's not to like, right? But in the meantime, we have all these clients who might be, somebody might be listening to this and going, well, my therapist doesn't do this. Like, how can I empower myself in my own therapy?
yeah. Well, that's a lot of the purpose of my website. I've got a free depression class there for
Mm.
patients who are depression. Go and take my depression test and get a reading of how depressed you are. And then I think I have a depression uh, class that you can take, and I think there's like something like 20 or 25 classes, roughly an hour each. Or if you're anxious, you can take the anxiety test, get a reading. There's a free anxiety class for you. My books, there's been research even on my first book, Feeling Good, if you're depressed, that this Forrest Gogan, a research psychologist from University of Alabama, did quite a few controlled outcome studies to see if feeling good had antidepressant properties, and he
Wow.
reported in, I think, 10 published studies. Some were in JCCP and medical journals and different things, and he reported that if you hand feeling good to someone with moderate or severe depression who's looking for treatment, and say you have to be on a waiting list for 4 weeks before you get your treatment, but you can read this book in the meantime. That 4 weeks later, 50 to 65% of them had recovered so much they no longer needed or wanted treatment.
That's
And so
awesome.
that's something you
Yeah.
can do for yourself or for a loved one
Hmm.
who's depressed, is just hand them a copy of Feeling Good, and
Hmm.
it's cheap on Amazon. I think you can get the paperback for $8. I think you can get used hardbound first editions, which are rare and
Yeah.
valuable, but you can buy them on Amazon for $1 or two.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
know. They found some unreleased first editions of the hardbound of Feeling Good.
So you would still recommend they read Feeling Good
Oh yeah, it's great.
before Feeling Great?
I just can't answer that. A lot of people have read Feeling Great and said, this is 10 times better than Feeling Good. That was my favorite book, and this one knocks it cold. But Feeling Good ain't broke, and it's still working miracles
Yeah.
for people. So
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, but I know they have this ridiculous sale on Feeling Great. In fact, Amazon will not allow the publisher to advertise feeling great on Amazon. You know why?
They can't fulfill it.
No, no, they can fulfill it because the publisher's printing tons of copies, but they're selling it so cheap that they
Um,
lose money on it.
oh,
And so they're trying to discourage anyone from buying it. But and Pessy has a special on it right now, and I think it's like almost the same price as a paperback and free uh, shipping and everything. So if you want
yeah,
to try feeling great, I think it started out like the normal price is like $27 for a hardbound, and I think you can get it now for like 15 or $14 or $13 or something. So,
great.
but whatever. I mean, I have an anxiety book called When Panic Attacks. If you're struggling with, anxiety disorder or something like that, that would be the book for you. If you're having a marital or a relationship problem, I have one, Feeling Good Together. I have books on different topics, on different kind of problems. So, you would want to get the book that's most tailor-made to whatever's bugging
Hmm.
you.
Hmm. Yeah, that's well. And all of these books do what you said initially. They go to the belief system.
They do what you.
Do all of these books do what you said initially, and that they go to the belief system? They teach you how to
Oh yeah. Yeah,
understand
yeah,
and
they're
change.
all focused on changing these distorted thoughts. And then
Mhm.
the Feeling Good Handbook has a lot on the self-defeating beliefs. Ellis called them irrational beliefs, but that's a little biased because they're
Yeah.
two-edged swords. But he did have the right idea. And Karen Horney, the feminist psychiatrist, she's really the one that got it all started. Are you familiar with her?
Tyranny of the shoulds.
Yeah, 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 that's
Mhm.
right. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And she
Mhm.
had the love addiction and the achievement addiction, and we have this ideal self that's perfect. And
Yeah.
then we have our real self, and when we notice the difference, we get all ticked off and frustrated
Yeah.
and depressed. I thought that was really, really brilliant. And all
True.
the other stuff has just been ways of saying that and putting the bells and whistles on it.
Yeah, I always look at my ideal self's to-do list,
Yeah,
and then
right.
I have to remember my real self is the one doing it. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that's right. That's where the cats have helped me out so much because when I hang out with them, it's really, really special. But they're not special. They're just, what we used to call alley cats, and the ones that would be foraging in the garbage to survive when I was growing up. And we get feral cats, and we fall in love with them, and they,
Aw.
they they generally fall in love with us too. And I'm not special. I'm I'm just kind of falling apart. And I go out running. I think I'm running real fast, and then some elderly lady with a cane will go zooming past me. and, but that's what the cats have told me. When you no longer need to be special, life becomes special, and that's kind of the
Mm.
message I try to deliver to patients is getting out of that trying to be this ideal self, and you just accept your shitty below average self, and that's enlightenment. But people don't want it. It doesn't sound that good.
It used
But
to be dare to be average, but I hear that your thinking is dare to be below average
yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah, average. I'm looking up at average these days. Average is way up there somewhere.
Man, I can do this then. I can do this.
Yeah,
Well, David, thank you so much. It's been
thank you.
such a delight
Yeah,
and honor. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to learning more, and great to
great.
hear about some resources I didn't even know about. So
Yeah, it's just
yeah,
fun to meet a kindred spirit on the road. Thank you so much.
thank you as well for all you're doing for humanity and for
Bye
the science
bye.
too. Bye.